All right, everybody, welcome to the STOA. I am R.N. Rogerson, and I am the steward of the STOA. Peter Lindbergh is having some internet trouble right now. So even though he is still in the Zoom room, as you can see, I will be covering for him today. So today we have Michael Taft, Kati Devaney, and Erik Davis here to talk to us about their new endeavor, the Alembic, which is a space in Berkeley, California, dedicated to meditation, movement, spiritual creativity, scientific experimentation, and psychedelic integration. And with this, they hope to catalyze new cultural forms by bringing together different people, practices, and sensibilities that don't always find themselves under the same roof. I was actually the first person to tell Peter about the Alembic. And the way I phrased it was, if the STOA were to manifest in physical space, if the STOA was an in-person space for people to gather, it might look something like the Alembic. So we're going to have a discussion with Michael, Kati, and Erik for about 20 minutes-ish before we pivot to Q&A. So go ahead and start throwing your questions that you might have for any of them into the chat. And if we like your question, we will call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question during the Q&A portion. And just FYI, this is being recorded. So if you do not want to appear on YouTube, just mention that when you ask your question, and we will read the question for you. Okay, so Michael, Kati, Erik, welcome. It's great to have you guys here. Maybe you could go around and introduce yourself one by one and talk about your role at the Alembic, and then we'll get into some discussion. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. With my visual aid, this is a very important part. Everyone pay close attention. This is the most important part of the entire thing. This is an actual Alembic, which I'm trying to get into focus. There we go. Not quite working, but it's essentially a still, a copper still, right? There's one part, there's the other part. And so Alembic is a very old Arabic-based word for a still, right? But more specifically in alchemy, right? It is sort of the vessel of sacred transformation, right? So we're doing our spiritual transformation inside a vessel. And so that's the metaphor we chose for our project that we're doing together. So as I recognize a lot of faces here, as most of you know, I'm Michael Taft. I'm a meditation teacher, an author and podcaster and stuff like that. And the sort of genesis of this project is kind of funny. It started with like so many things these days, it started with the sudden monkey wrench of the pandemic coming into life. And I had been doing quite a bit of work from home in this tiny one-room place that I shared with my wife and our animals, including a parrot, and when I was home alone, really easy to do my work. But once the pandemic happened, everyone was home at the same time. And it was just impossible to do that work. And so I wanted a place. I needed an office. And of course, suddenly in that first, I don't know if you guys remember, like the first 1 or 2 months of the pandemic, like office space was like 10 times as expensive as it had been. It was just suddenly people were gouging on office space. It was really hard to get. And so I was just talking to people. it was like spamming everyone I talked to. I need an office. I need an office. I need an office. If you know anything, if you know anything. And one of the guys I was talking to is Michael Ziegler, who's long time, the character in the Bay Area since, Berkeley 1968 kind of thing. And he has a building here in Berkeley near near Emeryville. So way on the, let me think here, south side of Berkeley and close to Oakland. And he had an opening there of an entire place that he had rented as a yoga center. But yoga was out. There's no yoga to do. So he talked to the people who have the lease and they were like, sure, we're not using it right now. And so suddenly I had an office, but instead of like an office, I had 5,500 square feet of like gorgeous rooms to just kick around in. And so I was doing all my work from there. And Michael Ziegler kept, he's an interesting guy, and we kept meeting, and he'd be like, there's a history behind this space. It's been a like an alternative spirituality movement center for over 25 years. It used to be called Seventh Heaven. I was running it. We've had every teacher in the world here over time, and parties and music and all kinds of stuff. But I can't do it anymore. I can't run it anymore. So I rented it to the yoga studio now because of COVID. They can't continue. And so we started talking about what it would be like if there was kind of a reboot of something that was alternative spirituality, movement type stuff. Both Michael and I have an interest in psychedelic stuff, research and integration and stuff. So maybe that would be brought in. And we started talking, and we talked about this for like a year. And the more we talked about it, he kept getting more and more real about it. And I kept going, this is just a great idea, but I don't have time. I do not have the bandwidth to do this. I don't know how to do this kind of thing. And but the more we talked, the more it kind of got into my dream life. And then I started talking with Kati and Erik. So things started to get quite a bit more real very suddenly. And I'll hand it off there to you guys to take the next chapter.
Okay. So let's see. I'll finish that thread and then give a little background on me. Um, so I'm Kati. I'm a neuroscientist and a meditator. I've been meditating for 20 years, and I've been studying neuroscience for about as long. And through a series of ridiculous coincidences, I end up also running a Dharma space for several years, starting in 2018. And the reason I ended up in that Dharma space in the first place is because I had found Michael's podcast, and then found out he was leading meditations. So I started sitting with him. And then I was running this other center on a volunteer basis. And I did that for 3 years and learned a ton about how this stuff works. I was coming straight out of academia, so I had to learn a lot of stuff from first principles. Um, in 2021, I quit like basically everything I was doing, and that turned out to make enough space to do all of the things I really want to do. So I think it was August or September 2021, Michael called me up. I was on the East Coast, and he said, "Hey, I have a lead on this amazing space. I want to turn it into a center. I want you to help me run it." I said yes. I bought a car. I drove it across the country, and I just moved into an Airbnb. It was just like a full yes. And that was my, personal like yes to Alembic. And part of what we're doing in the space is correcting for an issue that came up in my own meditation practice. So when I started meditating in 2002, and this is still the case in a lot of places now, when you would go into a center or a place to learn how to meditate, they would teach one technique. And often, for bonus points, they would tell you that all the other techniques were a bunch of nonsense and you should avoid them. And because of that, I got kind of trapped in a technique that wasn't really working for me for a very long time because I believed that it was kind of the right way to do things. And this is part of what we're doing at Alembic that I really care about a lot and am motivated by a lot is we're offering like a kaleidoscope of different practices, techniques, events that can draw from different communities, but also kind of embodying the idea that there is no one right way to do this. So part of the motivating idea behind this center is that you can come in, say, every day for a week, and you can try. Right now, if you come in every day for a week, I think you can go to 9 different classes in a week. So you can try a bunch of different things, and then you can find the thing that resonates with you, and you can go deep with that thing. And so in a lot of ways, like what we're doing here is I'm trying to kind of create the thing that I wish I had when I started meditating. And the other piece that I want to talk about is we're putting a neuroscience lab into the space. So I'm coming from academia, and I've been doing meditation research for about 10 years. But inside academia, there's a kind of narrow band of research that you can do into this kind of thing. And at Alembic, since we have all of these different practitioners who are coming through the door to do their practices, we having a lab in the space allows us to sample both acute kind of state level changes, what changes in the brain when you're meditating, um, also what changes about your day, if we do pre and post meditation, and then also what's changing over time. So, what's changing in the brain and in the mind and in the psychology as you kind of move along these paths of practice. So I can say much more about that. I'll wait for people to ask about it because I could just talk for an hour about that. But the lab being inside the space and the kind of interaction between meditation, movement, creativity, psychedelic integration, like these kind of more nebulous practices, and then the kind of quantitative scientific side of things coming together is part of the project that's like really exciting for me. Okay, I'll hand it over to Erik.
Great. Well, let's see. I just a little bit about how I got hooked up with the project. I met Michael. He invited me onto his wonderful podcast to talk about high weirdness, and I felt a little bit odd there, kind of the odd man out, because he usually interviews these like hi-hat meditators, and though I'm a long-term meditator, I don't really talk about it very much, and I'm too freelance to really count as much in the visible world of meditation practice. But we had a great time, and had all sorts of connections and similarities. And I started also going to the Dharma Center where Kati and he were both doing their due, and I started to do some events there, and it was sort of some of the first live meditation-oriented classes that I was doing. It was called Psychedelic Sangha at the time, and now it's called the Dharmanaut Circle, just a small monthly gathering of psychonauts who are interested in Buddhism or meditation. And so we got talking, and I'm very inspired by this vision for kind of two reasons. One is that the kind of a pluralism or eclecticism, if you will, that Kati was talking about in terms of meditation modalities, et cetera, was once, of course, terribly common. I started doing public speaking in the very early 1990s, around 1990 in New York at a place called the New York Open Center. And the Open Center was sort of like an urban Esalen or Ojai Institute or Omega Institute, where the whole thing was to present kind of a smorgasbord where you'd have different practices, East and West. So I'm very comfortable in that kind of environment, that kind of pluralistic environment. I find very exciting. But also the one thing about the Open Center was that it wasn't just practices. It was practices, but it was also talks. Peter and Lamborn Wilson, who recently died, was giving a lot of talks there about esoteric history. And I started to do the same thing. So what it became as well was not just a place for practices of movement and meditation and mysticism, but also of a kind of alternative current of thinking. And one of the things that I'm really invested in, and frankly find to be a great challenge, and I know that this is on Peter's mind as well as and other folks who are behind the Stoa and other places, is just what is pedagogy now? How do we bring forward ideas, cultivate communities of discernment and research, kind of outside of the academy, but still respecting a certain kind of rigor? And it's not an easy problem. And one of the things that I got excited about when I was hearing more about the Alembic was the idea of like, oh, great. And not only can we have this kind of multiplicity of practices, which I think is really exciting for a lot of reasons, but also this might be the kind of environment, this is the kind of environment where these kinds of alternative learning practices can go forward. Even if they're just lectures, they're lectures on unusual things from unusual angles. And as people know now, with the whole sense-making crisis and everything, is we're all trying to figure out ways to even start to think about how do we think about this stuff. both in terms of what's happening now, but also because I'm a historian in a lot of ways, about how to bring forward and remind people about currents, both ancient currents and frankly countercultural ones that are getting sort of overwritten by the intensity of the now, which is not just the urgency of the crisis we're facing or the myriad of crises that we're facing, but also a certain kind of tendency that the sort of internet mind has towards sort of underscoring the contemporary moment and modes of thinking and discourse that don't tend to be super rooted in tradition, either modern bohemian traditions or more ancient traditions, which are things that I'm very invested in. So that's a more general interest that I have in sort of bringing that idea into the alembic, and the idea that, you know, we're building a vessel and there's going to be a lot of ingredients that go into that vessel. And if we can kind of keep the container going, then lots of stuff can go in there, even some things that aren't great. You know, Huxley has a wonderful line in defense of some of the goofiness at Esalen and other kinds of institutes like this, which he's saying like, look, you know, we're opening to the things that are beyond reason or beyond knowledge as we know it. Of course, there's going to be some junk in the mix. And for me, that's actually part of the juice of the brew in the alembic. Not that we're seeking out junk, but that conflict and contrast and even different views can go together in a really kind of dynamic way. And then the other interest I have that kind of comes along with this is in psychedelic culture. And what is psychedelic culture now? Does it even exist? Where does it exist? And right now, one of the things that I see happening is there's a kind of, with the mainstreaming of psychedelics, there's a tendency to overlook both the weird side of it, the sort of bizarre, awesome confusion of the thing, but also the sort of spiritual or insight-driven use of these things rather than the medicalized one. There's so much emphasis on healing and medicalization, and then this is what is being, you know, makes corporate America happy. And so there's this whole model of psychedelics as healing, when I think they're at least as much about grappling with reality, grappling with death, grappling with the you know, nature of being human, as they are about healing from particular maladies. So I was very attracted by the fact that while, you know, Michael and Kati both presented, you know, very nice kind of taint-free models of themselves, they're also both heads, and that they owe a lot to their headdom, and that this is part of the picture. And it's obviously part of the picture of what's going on now with the transformation of psychedelics. And so to be able to figure out how to gently weave and fold these things into a space focused on meditation and movement, to sort of have a space for the larger kind of visionary culture to remake itself and find its own way, it was very exciting as well, partly because, you know, things are really changing. So exactly how we're going to explore that will partly depend on how the legality of things transform. But even short of the kind of opportunities that a place like Oregon has right now, there's a lot of things you can do along the sides that sort of bring together aspects, I think, of psychedelic culture that are really key to bring forward. So I'm kind of interested in how to weave these things into the space as well.
All right, thank you for that. What was that?
No, I was just seeing if Michael had anything to add to that or anything.
Sure.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, Kati presented the basic idea of the vision for the meditation part of the space, right? Which is like there's kind of a wide palette. And again, it points back to why we named it Alembic. You'd think a space that has meditation in it or whatever would be called, you know, the lotus or something, pointing to like Eastern traditions and stuff like that. And we really wanted to not do that. Not because of any problem with Eastern tradition, but rather to just not only point back to interesting, you know, Western, in quotes, roots or whatever of a lot of practices, but also just as something both with its roots in the old, but completely new and different, coming from where we're at here, where we're at now, while still, again, honoring the deep roots and even the counterculture roots um, at the same time. So we call it alembic, coming from actual alchemical Western tradition, right? Rather than something like lotus. And the main thing that interests me is what wakes people up, what helps people integrate awakening, what helps people get insights into the kind of life issues that Erik was talking about, what helps people find liberation, right? That's a super deep, passionate topic that I'm dedicating my whole life to, right? And so what I've learned over a long period of time is that uh, different strokes for different folks work really well. There has to be many, many different types of practice. There has to be a lot of different orientations, not just one view or, philosophical bent, but a lot of different ones. And even as Erik was talking about, kind of the ferment of even some bad stuff in there, maybe accidentally, and some weird stuff that makes you look at things in a different direction or in a new way, or actually shows you where you might, go wrong, all that kind of stuff. And so the vision for me has to do with not only presenting, a wide range of practices, but an environment with other types of learning, embodied learning, arts, actual bringing in the arts, let's say painting or poetry or something, and then, the history and social aspects of all this stuff, plus the community aspect, right? We're really focused on building a community here. And it's kind of interesting. There's two levels of community these days, right? There's the IRL brick and mortar community in the Berkeley area. And then we're also out, of course, on the interwebs. So there's kind of two groups. And of course, that intermingle in really interesting ways. Like there's Manuel sitting here in Germany. He, did a lot of our online stuff, and then the other week came over and hung out with us at Alembic for like 10 days, bringing, combining or overlapping from out there in internet land to the physical, the real. Like I'm giving him a hug in the foyer of the physical space. So that kind of community building, right, where lots of different ideas are welcome, lots of different people are welcome, and there may be something for everyone while still maintaining some kind of cohesion and cohesive vision, right? It's not just an explosion of everything that's just total chaos. There's some real thought behind, who's there presenting and what kind of what communities might get a lot out of it. This is we're a 501c3, we're a nonprofit, and so we're not in there trying to extract cash and not be a startup and not, it's just a completely different mood, right? Where it's like the whole point of Alembic is the point of an Alembic, right? We're catalyzing this transformative process. At least that's the vision. So I just can't even begin to express how just pleased I am with what we've done so far and the vision and how it's actually unfolding and all the work that everyone's done. It's truly awesome and seems to be really taking off. So Kati, you have stuff to add?
Um, well, the other thing I wanted to mention is that I've been making this joke a lot, but it's not an actual joke, is that we have three different spaces and we can run different events all at the same time, and then everything kind of comes together into like a lobby sort of tea lounge area. And I've been joking that that tea lounge is where I want the neuroscientists to have to talk to the astrologers. But it's like not a joke. Like that is going to happen there. And so on Thursday nights now we have Michael's non-dual meditation class, and then we have a martial arts class, and those meet at the same time, and then they both feed into the lobby, and everyone has tea together. And
And the meditators
Michael,
meet up.
yeah, meditators get rocked. Um, and Michael mentioned the importance of building community, and he mentioned these two levels of the IRL and the online. Um, and there's this other very interesting thing happening, much in the way that, individuals need to be in community when you're doing kind of these types of explorations. Like you want to meditate in a sangha, you want to do your psychonautical activities with your psychonaut friends because stuff can get weird and you want to bounce off other people and you can kind of compensate for each other's blind spots. You can point things out to each other that you might have missed. The same thing is true on the community level. So in the Bay Area, we have all of these different subcultures, and a lot of them are very interested in either increasing well-being or pursuing awakening or just curiously investigating like qualia space, like what's possible in consciousness. And all of these communities have figured out some useful stuff, and I'll be so bold as to say all of them have missed some useful stuff too. And so not just putting all the individuals together into one space, but then bringing these different communities together. And we've done that so far. We've had a couple live music events. So it's the kind of thing where like if you're coming to this place to meditate, then there's a concert there. You can like bring your partner and it integrates over the people who may have a tendency to stay more siloed. We have people who just come on Thursdays for Michael's class or who just come on Fridays for Qigong class. So on purpose, we run these more kind of general events to bring the community together and get the people talking to each other and like sharing what they've learned in their explorations.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit to that, and then we can open it up. Is just the, in a way, it's kind of a bold move that we're moving, I think, gently towards, which is to really have a place of kind of genuine pluralism. And one example is the sort of neuroscience talks to astrology zone. And what does that really mean? It means really trying to cultivate a certain kind of humility and a certain kind of openness towards real difference and curiosity. And what we hope to inculcate is a sort of vibe of open-endedness, curiosity, a willingness to not know, to be curious about where other people are coming from. And, in today's world, that's a bit of a utopian position, and it may lead to some challenging, interesting problems, but it's much more our preference. And for me, it's particularly about noting that there really is a newer culture of awakening that's much more left brain, particularly in the Bay Area. A lot of people coming up in startup culture in Silicon Valley and the quantified self, and many of whom have left beside a lot of the kind of what I think of as the weird, or in some ways the inheritance of the counterculture. And similarly, a lot of that stuff has gotten very staid and very set, particularly in some older generations, and is really in need of some stirring up. So one of the visions for me is not so much to create a new worldview or a new paradigm. I think often that our paradigm is that there isn't really a paradigm, and we have to learn how to deal with that. But it's really about, frankly, seducing people into the fun of like, who knows what's going on? Let's check this out. And that also allows us to bring in things that aren't just traditional, but frankly, sacred. I'm very interested in sacred aesthetics. So like, I want to have a concert of Hindustani music where people are in there meditating. They're going for it. They're going for the big experience. And whether or not that means that you're a Hindu or not, or believe in Brahma or whatever, that's not really the point. The point is to create an environment where aesthetic experience, sacred practice, novel worldviews, even hardcore materialist worldviews have a place as part of a larger kind of culture of exploration. And in a way, that's a big ask, but hey, that's sort of where we are. And it kind of feels to me like part of the legacy of the Bay Area is to bring these things together, let them mutate. Weird things will happen, difficult conversations will happen, but hopefully a kind of sensibility that's just less siloed than what we're facing now, which is, I find, very discouraging aspect of our contemporary moment. So maybe that'll do for our intro rants.
Loving this discussion, getting very excited about the Alembic. I'm going to go ahead and tag in Peter, and Peter is definitely running a digital Alembic in many ways, a melting pot of practices. So Peter, what's your question?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And yeah, just so cool, this project. I'm just so excited about it and tempted to buy a plane ticket, just check it out now. And I love the emphasis on practice that is eclectic with different modalities and psychotechnologies from various traditions. And I know Erik said the spirit is one of pluralism, but I'm curious if there's any explicit or implicit theoretical, ideological, or even political through lines that influence what practices get selected. And that's just for anyone who feels called to answer that.
Well, it's a super open-ended question, right? So there's a lot to say about it. I think if you were hearing all three of us, describing what we're into, that's the through line. It's that I think more open rather than more closed down, more experimental rather than more sort of like formulaic, more questioning than answering, and more community-based than, let's say single teacher-based. And as a little corollary to that, we're definite. If there's one thing that is not allowed, it's any, like cult type stuff or guru type stuff. It's like explicitly not okay, where people are being drawn in and sort of, let's say, having their autonomy undermined. We're really about autonomy, I'm thinking in German in my head, sorry, underpinning the autonomy and helping that get stronger. So I would say that's one major no that we do embrace. Erik or Kati, more on that topic?
I think, I mean, it is, someone said in the chat, it's the same as the Stoa, it's whatever we're into. And in a way, between the three of us, we have decades and decades and decades of experience hanging out in these worlds. And we've developed a pretty solid intuition for what is interesting. And I would say part of my criteria when I'm talking to someone who wants to host an event with us or who wants to teach with us, one of the ways to counteract the tendency of people to kind of sample lightly across a bunch of different techniques and not go deep with a place like this that offers so many things is we make sure that everyone teaching from a particular technique has a very deep rooted practice in that technique. So that way, if someone gets excited about that thing, they can use that teacher as a doorway to go very deep with that thing. So we're looking for that level of experience, that level of knowledgeability. And another thing that kind of comes with it, which is a little harder to describe, but I call it sort of the electricity. It's like you can tell when you ask the teacher or the facilitator about their thing, that they're answering you off the top of their head in a way that's spontaneous and genuine. They're not like reciting something that they read in a book. So we're looking for people who have like really gone deep with their thing, and in doing so have not popped out into the sort of valley of thinking their thing is the only thing. It's like that combination of like deep expertise and open-mindedness. That's like a big plus. And then the part of it is just like what we're interested in and what we think is cool. And also at the community level, like we're starting to build an intuitive sense. We did a soft open in April, we did our grand opening on July 30th, and we're building a sense intuitively of what the community wants and what would be good for the community. And a lot of that is built, probably you did this too, Peter, experimentally, where it's like, oh, let's just put this there. This person like knows their stuff. Let's put them here and see if the community kind of vibes with it. And so it's like it's really like an iterative experimental conversation between us as kind of the curators and the stewards of the thing, with our practice history and what we think is interesting, and then what the community is going to benefit from and what they're going to think is interesting.
Yeah, just a quick notice. It's discernment is a very interesting issue. It's a real hard question. How do you teach discernment? And in today's world, there's a tendency to want to formalize boundaries around things in order to be safe, and to even cover your own ass. And I would say that we're leaning on the edgier form of that, in the sense of being willing to experiment. And we've had to already make certain calls in terms of discernment with things that have already been going, and then things that people come to us and have asked us to do. And we have been kind of winging it. But of course, by trusting each other and trusting in the discernment that we have all developed in these different domains, and all the domains that we've been involved in have these tendencies towards cultishness or ideologically underpinning or undermining autonomy, whether it's psychedelia or weird rationalist cults or meditation gurus and whatever. It's like they all have this tendency. But if you're going to like try to develop some real energy, you do have to kind of risk a little bit. And I think one example is like we have a contact improv class. Now, you say that to some people and they're like, whoa, yeah, whoa, man, no, that contact improv went south in our locality. And it can go south for obvious reasons. But we're like, okay, we're going to work on that, going to monitor it, going to keep the current flowing. And there's been some aspects of that space that we've had to trim. So it's a more dynamic process that does involve a little bit more trust, as well as drawing, certain things we're not going to do. We're not going to do this kind of stuff now. We're not going to do psychedelic practices that are illegal in our, locality. We're not going to do certain kinds of sex positive things that are just too strong for where we're at, so there are boundaries there. But I think that experimental quality is hopefully worth the additional complexity that it raises.
And I'll sneak in a follow-up question. So like the Stoa, like the underlying influence there is like Stoicism. And I was talking to Erik about this when I went on his podcast. And the thing about Stoicism is interesting. It's sort of like a dead lineage where we don't know how they actually practiced. Like the majority of the text was missing. We have some like scattered thoughts of what they did, but we don't know what they actually did. So that inspired me to just create this place to find, like, just do research and just kind of blow life into the tradition. And I'm wondering, like, I'm imagining that the Alembic, there's like a Buddhistic flavor or proclivity there with the practices that get selected. And I'm wondering if that's true. And if so, is there spiritual aims like awakening that influence the practices that will get selected? And I really love the spiritual buffet aspect of this place. And yeah, so is intuitively, is it like awakening or maybe individuation or theosis, or is there anything like spiritual aims that influence what gets selected or will get selected?
I'll start, and then I bet Michael has more to say on this. But I would say it's bigger than the kind of Buddhist idea of enlightenment or awakening. Like, that's part of it, but it's bigger than that. And we've been titrating how we talk about it. And for me, it's saying human development is almost too broad. Saying awakening is a little bit too narrow. And I've been kind of honing in on this idea of liberation and well-being. So there are all these practices that are doing something that is a relief for people, that's bringing them out of some kind of constriction and bringing them into a better relationship with themselves and with the world. And we're aiming to curate things around that. So you call it like adult development, or liberation, but it's bigger than our personal networks happen to have a very Buddhist leaning, and we're actively working to actually, here's the, like, if you know, like, Christian contemplatives, Sufi contemplatives, we've reached out to a few people to bring them in because we're trying to diversify the sort of Buddhist leaning element of it and bring in this kind of like metasystemic view about liberation.
Another follow-up, Peter? You're good? You're good. All right. Let's move on to some audience Q&A. Forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, but Ainup, you had 2 questions. You can just pick one of those to ask.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm a proud member of the Alembic and really excited to be part of the community. So thank you for creating it. So a couple of questions is, one is what kind of events and discussions are we planning around psychedelic stuff? And second question is, can you give us some examples about the projects or the type of stuff that will happen in the neuroscience lab?
Well, I'll talk about the psychedelics one at the moment. One of the things that we're planning is to have probably a course that I would co-teach with a friend of mine named Christian Greer, who's a scholar of the counterculture, and it would be something about like the lessons of the underground. I think one of the things that's happening right now, and this is on the heady side or the discussion side, is that in the current mainstreaming, there's a lot of forces that are actually cutting off the inherited tradition of our immediate ancestors, meaning like the hippies and the bohemians that came before them. And that there's actually a lot of stuff there, a lot of really exciting, fun, valid, useful, helpful, juicy, inspiring material there. And so that's one of the things that I want to, do kind of more personally. We're talking to folks from the Sacred Garden community, who's an Oakland-based community that is doing really, really great work, community-based, very, ethnobotany-based. And I'm really hoping to bring in, since one of the inspirations for the Alembic is science more generally, and just naturalism is kind of how I tend to think about it, because it has a sort of broader, more inclusive quality. We're like, hey, this whole thing is about nature. Let's get into nature. Is to bring in some of this, botanical dimensions. I think one of the things we hear very little about today is that if you're really on a psychedelic path and you want it to be a real path and not just a diversion or a medicine, that you're developing a relationship. And one of the ways to develop relationships is to actually become more intimate with the actual biology of at least plant medicines. And so there's certain ways to bring that kind of information forward that respect our basis. And there are a few things that we can do with substances that are legal, that we're talking about ways to model usage using what I tend to call subtle allies. There's a lot of things that are, relatively light, and yet through working with them, you can actually begin to model and shape deeper kinds of relational ways of dealing with psychedelics than, again, we tend to get in the mainstream, either through the kind of medical model or therapy-based model, or the sort of, balls out crazy Burning Man hedonist model, which has its place. So those are all aspects I would really hope that we'll see. We need to get the tech a little better, but to do salvia circles with, not smoked salvia, not the full weird ride, but the more subtle zones of it, because it's actually a very fascinating space to work through, really good for meditators. So I think there's a lot to be done on the kind of subtler end, and hopefully we'll be rolling that stuff out soon.
And I've also mentioned the neuroscience lab. Kati, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, that's a nice dovetail too, because actually no one has ever done an EEG study of salvia. So that's one of the projects that we could potentially do in the lab. So my lab is in the Center for the Science of Psychedelics at UC Berkeley. And there I have access to an fMRI, and that's where I do my academic work. And then inside Alembic, we're working on getting an EEG system. Right now we're working with a consumer grade EEG system, but hopefully we'll work up to like a 256 channel academic grade EEG system, and a new tech called FNIRS. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but it does brain imaging by arcing light through the brain, and light diffracts differently based on the ratio of oxygenated and deoxygenated hemoglobin, which is an indirect measure of neural activity. So it's the same contrast mechanism as fMRI, but it's a lot more portable, it's a lot less expensive. So these are two neuroimaging technologies that we can have cited in outside the Alembic. So working with that tech as well as some kind of more survey-based and questionnaire-based research, and then some qualitative research, we can start applying scientific methodology to questions that have not been possible inside kind of the academic Overton window. And we want to be looking at individual practitioners, as I mentioned before, over different time scales, acutely and also longitudinally, but also importantly looking at dyad work. So one of the projects we're really excited about, we're calling it the Pointing Out Project. So when a teacher is giving pointing out instructions to a student, what is actually happening there? And with EEG and with FNIRS, we can look at what each brain is doing while that instruction is happening and while it's being received by the student. And then we can also take subjective reports after. So that's one thing I'm really excited about. Another thing I'm really excited about is what I've been calling the Practice Matcher Project. So there's that saying, you know, awakening is an accident, but meditating makes you accident prone. But maybe we could make it like a little less of an accident. And a lot of times you end up kind of wandering around and like getting stuck in these local minima forever. And if we had more information about kind of what types of individual like psychobiological configurations benefited from different types of practice, we would be able to do like a practice curation. So right now this happens all a very ad hoc way. You know, you work with a teacher and you kind of flap your mouth at them for a while and then they like make some guesses about what's going on in your practice and they kind of direct you in a way. And I want to be very clear that I don't think having an EEG on someone's head is ever going to replace that relationship. That is really important. However, it's another tool that we can add on to the other host of tools that the teacher is working with to guide the student towards achieving their goals. So I'm really excited about that project and looking at, can we recommend different practices for different people at different times based on what's going on with them, with this added stream of information informed by biology. And there's a bunch of other stuff. We're working on a big proposal right now. It's like several pages long, but those are like a couple of the things that I'm really excited about.
Thank you, both of you.
Thanks.
Katie, Michael, Eric, do we have a hard stop at the top of the hour? Could you guys go over just a bit? Yeah.
We can do a little bit over.
Okay, let's squeeze in one more question from Sam.
Hey there, everybody. Katie, we'd spoken. I know you had participated in the Respond event that took place at Maple, I think last August, with folks like Benita Roy and John Vervaeke, Zach Stein, lots of other kind of sort of contemporary luminaries that were coming together to aim to try to discern a meta curriculum for the cultivation of wisdom. And so you having participated in that, I'm just maybe curious to hear any updates that might be there as far as like, I don't know how concrete it is yet, but possibilities of what might spring up at the Alembic coming out of that.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, speaking of if the stoa was an actual place, that did feel like I had like stepped into the like brain of the stoa, hanging out with those folks. And the time that we spent together was incredibly productive and really generative. And we made a lot of progress towards developing this meta curriculum for wisdom practices. And the next thing that's going to be happening there that I know of is Benita Roy is going to be doing something with small groups of us coming up. So if you're not on her Substack, you should subscribe. And once we have bits of the curriculum, we're going to be ground testing some of that at Alembic. And particularly the kind of more, so we developed like several different tracks involved with assessing and cultivating wisdom. And one of the tracks was explicitly like a measurement track. And this is really interesting to me. How do you measure wisdom? How do you know that your teaching is working? And this is something that we're going to be piloting at Alembic as time goes on. And then we're also thinking of offering shorter courses. So as the meta curriculum generates concrete curricula, we can time box those and test them out at Alembic, and then iterate on them with the rest of the group.
Any follow-up, Sam, or Michael or Eric? Do you want to join in? Nope. Okay.
I just want to quickly say,
Yeah.
I have an interest in putting together an actual meta-systematicity mini conference, and talking with David Chapman and so on and so forth. There's the possibility of something like that happening along those lines. So that's of interest.
All right, we're going to close it down now. Any closing thoughts from the three of you, or any events coming up you want to highlight, anything like that?
Well, I'll just say first, it's great to be here. And it's really nice to be on this side of the STOA. I've been on the other side of the STOA many, many times. And I think the STOA was one of the main forces keeping me like sane during 2020 and 2021. So it's really great to be here talking with this community. There's so much overlap between the STOA community and the Alembic community. And if you're in Berkeley, swing by. If you're not in Berkeley, follow us on Twitter, come hang out. You can fly in like Manuel did. And then one upcoming event that I want to highlight that I think is like a cool Alembic-y event is Michael Taft is doing Death Sangha the Saturday before Halloween. So almost every spiritual tradition has a death meditation or death contemplation. And often those are the things that when things sort of got filtered out into like mindfulness, those get left behind because they're uncomfortable. So on Halloween, or on the Saturday before Halloween, we do like a 1 hour meditation on death. And then this year, if there's enough interest, we're going to have a dance party afterwards. And that just sprung out of the last time I did Death Sangha alone on Zoom. I had a one-person dance party afterwards, and I was like, "This is a good idea. Let's do that." So that's kind of that's something. If you're in Berkeley, I would and you're up for it. It's often a very kind of harrowing meditation, but I would highly recommend that the Saturday before Halloween.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, that's not for the faint of heart. It's not like it's soothing. It's much more intense and kind of along the tantric vein of let's amp up the feelings and ideas around like horror, cosmic horror and terror and things like that around death. So it's really a particular mood. And when you come for Halloween, we want you to be dressed in some kind of death outfit, like corpse paint or a skull mask or something. So it'll be really fun, but you got to be in the mood for that kind of fun. Thanks for inviting us here, and I really this group always, there's such a good flavor on the STOA, such a particularly a whiff or a scent that is just very unique, and I love it. And I just want to invite, we're very open, as I think we've made clear. So I want to invite everyone to feel welcome to come to the Alembic or somehow participate in the Alembic, either in person or online, or just stay informed. We'd love and ask us questions and dip your toe in. We'd love to hear from you.
All right. Thank you to the three of you for coming so much. Let's give them a silent round of applause. It's been a great discussion. You can find more information on the Alembic at berkeley.alembic.org. Post it in the chat. You can sign up for events there. There's also a YouTube channel, I believe, where you can look at meditation archives. Yeah, and streaming. Quickly, I'm going to plug 2 events for the STOA. On October 25th, we have the realization process, which is an embodied approach to non-dual awakening. That's with Judith Blackstone. And then on November 30th at 12 p.m., we're going to have the Art of Worlding, creating the world you wish to inhabit, with Ian Chang. So all the events can be found at the STOA. So thanks everyone for coming, and we will see you next time.